Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Now Showing podcast, where I take a look at movies that are now available to watch and give you some of my thoughts. First movie up is the new theatrical release Air. We've seen Ben Affleck and Matt Damon paired together, often with fascinating results. Their latest collaboration, telling the story of how Nike changed its fortunes by signing Michael Jordan, is no different. Affleck stars as Nike CEO Phil Knight and directs the film, while Damon takes the lead as Sonny Vaccaro, the talent scout who helped make the deal happen. The rest of the cast includes strong performers like Chris Tucker, Chris Messina, Jason Bateman, and Viola Davis, who plays Jordan's mother, Dolores. It takes the action back to 1984, where Nike is third in the shoe market and teetering on the edge of shutting down its basketball division. They need something big, and that's when Vaccaro locks into the game-changing signing of Jordan. He sees him as a player that could change the game, not just for the NBA, but for Nike itself. Despite the obstacles placed by Jordan's agent, David Falk, in a great role by Chris Messina, he pursues the family, hoping to just get them in the room to make some magic happen. This film is funny, emotional, engaging. I love the period setting and the style of the 1980s, the way Affleck showcases that throughout the film. I also enjoyed the performances. Damon was great in the lead role. He drew me into the story. You can't help but root for his passionate underdog character. I also enjoyed the supporting cast. Davis was magnificent in her role as Jordan's mother. Affleck made me laugh quite a few times as Knight. So did a lot of the rest of the cast. But the real scene-stealing performance for me comes from Messina as the crass and over-the-top agent Falk. His back and forth with Damon, done mostly via phone calls, was incredible. I love the way the film was put together and the story it told. Vaccaro had a vision for what Jordan would become as a player, and he's done all that and more. This was a beautiful celebration of the landmark deal, the people behind it, and of Michael Jordan, perhaps the greatest athlete I've ever seen. I love the powerful emotional ride of the film. It's my favorite of the year so far. It opened on Wednesday. You can now see it in theaters. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I hope you take a chance to go and check this film out. The next two are streaming films. The first is On a Wing and a Prayer. These are going to both be faith-based streaming films. On a Wing and a Prayer is now streaming on Prime Video. Just imagine you're on a plane with your family. It's Easter Sunday. You're headed home after attending your brother's funeral when suddenly the pilot goes unconscious and you're left to fly the plane, something you've never done, and land it safely. In 2009, that was the situation facing Doug White, who'd only previously taken one exploratory flight on a Cessna. This was a different kind of plane entirely, and the stakes were much larger as his entire family was on board. Yet, thanks to his actions, the support from those he received on the ground, and a big dose of prayer, White was able to land safely. It's been more than a decade since the flight, but the new Prime Video film On a Wing and a Prayer chronicles that harrowing journey. It released Friday, just in time for Easter weekend, which seemed fitting given the timing of when the flight itself took place. In the film, Dennis Quaid plays Doug White, and we open with him and his brother Jeff, played by Brett Rice, taking that flying lesson. Doug can't stick the landing. But after getting on the ground, they head to a barbecue competition. And later, when Doug is home in Louisiana with his family, he gets a call that his brother passed suddenly. He and his wife, Terry, played by Heather Graham, head to the funeral with their 2 daughters. Mired in grief, they begin that fateful trip home on Easter Sunday. When the pilot dies, he finds himself facing an even more difficult landing, something that we know from the opening of the film he has never done. He soon calls for help and eventually gets connected to a flight instructor in Connecticut named Carrie, played by Jesse Metcalf, who's dealing with a family trauma of his own. He has to try to talk this novice through landing a plane he's never flown to avoid a similar tragedy. If you remember the true events or have read about it, you know how the story ends. You also know this kind of a film is probably not going to get told if it's got a depressing or tragic ending. Doug and Terry were very religious people who in large part leaned on their faith before, during, and after this event. This is a tale of faith and survival, and it's ideally timed for Easter weekend. The performances here are okay. The script wanders a bit, and the film is just 102 minutes, but sometimes it feels slowly paced even at that. The true story here is amazing, but the way this retelling is crafted and laid out is sometimes dry and stiff. It was originally aimed to be a theatrical release, but probably makes more sense as a Prime Video original. For those looking for a little bit of faith-based inspiration this weekend, A Wing and a Prayer will hit the right notes. It's a sturdy, if unspectacular, true life tale. I gave it 2.5 out of 5 stars, and as I mentioned, it's streaming as of today on Prime Video, so you can check that one out. My last film today is Praise This, which, as we enter the weekend, it's our second faith based film. This time, an original musical on Peacock that clearly draws inspiration from the formula that made Pitch Perfect a hit. This time we open at a gospel youth choir competition in Atlanta, and things just don't go well for Jess, played by Angelica Washington, and her choir. It's also a tough go for Pastor PG, played by Tristan Wilds, who is the new preacher with the new church on the block. Their choir performance goes off the rails and it leaves them embarrassed. But when Jess's cousin Sam, played by Chloe Bailey, comes to live with them, her fortunes and the fortunes of her choir begin to change. Will Sam and her talent be enough to carry them to the top during the next competitive cycle? This film, as I mentioned, closely follows the formula and the plot outlined from the original Pitch Perfect film, including the arcs with Sam pursuing a musical career of her own. It wants to be funny and charming, wants to get you to buy into the characters and the journey, and it's also a film that explores faith. They add that kind of faith-based element. Those are all noble pursuits, but for me, it didn't quite come together. The narratives and the construction of the plot fall a little bit short. Some of the performances and sequences are awkward and sometimes tough to watch. It was a really solid idea, but for me, it didn't quite land. I gave this one 2 out of 5 stars, but it is something a little bit different that gives you an option to watch on streaming this Easter weekend. There are a couple other movies out in theaters, but I will touch on them in future episodes. Eric and I are taking the week off, so we hope you have a happy Easter, and I will see you next week. Until then, enjoy